Well, welcome, everyone. Welcome to the panel. I appreciate everyone's willingness to stick around through the duration of this conference and to be here for this great panel. I couldn't be more honored to be here with some new friends, very old friends, but very esteemed colleagues throughout the community. And I think without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into this fascinating topic. So it's the topic of the business of space is core to a lot of my career trajectory for sure. And it's such a fascinating topic that is going in a lot of different directions. And I think we have a really great panel here that kind of extends all the way from the government side of the world where the impact of commercial space is being felt and is going to be a critical component of our strategies moving forward, but then all the way out to the investment end on the commercial side of the spectrum. And then we have Kevin in the middle who just is involved in everything from every end of the spectrum. So without further ado, I'm going to let each of our panelists give an introduction of themselves and some opening remarks on the position that they have with respect to the business of space. And I think, Geoffroy, I'm incredibly glad that you are here. Both
Thank you.
Me as a board member of USGIF and me as a member of the community, to have you here as a first-time participant in the GEOINT community here is incredible. And I have a feeling that the majority of the people in the audience probably have not had a chance to meet you yet. Everyone in the audience, I highly encourage you to follow up with him after the fact. But would you give us just a few comments on who you are, where you're coming from, and kind of why you're here for the first time?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm Geoffroy Beaudot. I'm working for Luxembourg Defense. I'm leading the Department of Space and Cyber for the Ministry of Defense of Luxembourg. And actually, what I propose maybe to start with a small introduction in order to explain to the audience what Luxembourg is doing in space, because I'm not sure that all of you knows exactly what you are doing. So I will start with that, if I may. So first, I would like to mention that it's really an honor and a pleasure for me for being here at this conference. It's actually my first conference, and it's really an honor also to be here at this panel. I think that this event is really a key event on the agenda of the international GEOINT community. And being here on this panel allows me to underline the great importance that space represents for Luxembourg, and especially for the Luxembourgish Defense Department. Space, and especially GEOINT, offer unprecedented opportunities for development and progress that enhance our daily lives. The day-to-day applications of space technologies bring significant benefit to our economies. Climate change studies, agriculture, or defense applications. However, as our societies increasingly depend on space assets, this also increases our vulnerabilities. Defense is no exception, and space, along with cyber defense, has become a real national security issue. This evolution is even more worrisome as space-based technologies and GEOINT applications have come to play a key role in ensuring national security, enabling peacekeeping operations and crisis management, as well as ensuring the safety of military operations. The role of GEOINT in Ukraine is definitely a perfect example of the importance of GEOINT product. Today, almost all military operations rely on space-derived data, services, and assets. Therefore, space capabilities and their protection are key for national security. Today, space has become an increasingly contested, competitive, and congested environment. Already, we see interferences, cyber attacks, anti-missile destruction technologies in development, if not already tested in space. These hostile activities will most certainly proliferate in the years to come. At the international level, and as part of its commitment to multilateralism, Luxembourg defends the value promoted by the international organization of which it is a member, such as the European Union, NATO, and the United Nations. In this context, Luxembourg's responsibility meets its obligations as a reliable partner within this international organization and bears its burden of responsibility for the effort inherent to collective defense. Luxembourg, this really tiny country on Earth, which is, by the way, actually really much bigger in space, has been a space actor since the early 1980s. especially with SOS, the SATCOM world leader company. More recently, the government has launched an ambitious space vision, which will advance within Luxembourg's overarching strategic objective to foster economic diversification. I would like to mention our in-service governmental communication satellite, the GovSat-1, but more important for this GEOINT community, in 2023, Luxembourg Defense will take the next step by launching its own observation satellite program, the so-called LuxEOSys, the Luxembourg Earth Observation System. Our space program, GovSat and LuxEOSys, are really strategic tools for the government's defense policy and a key contribution of high-value assets to the international security and defense operation. We aim to provide reliable and controlled capabilities that can support requirements for partners, nations, and international organizations. Luxembourg believes that defense policy has to be addressed in a wider approach. We indeed follow a 3D foreign policy, a common comprehensive approach, integrating the means of diplomacy, development, cooperation, and defense policy. Based on these premises, our Minister of Defense set a number of priorities in defense, also relevant for space and GEOINT community. First, the development of dual-use capabilities, serving not only military activities, but also civilian applications. In this regard, our future Earth observation system will provide high-resolution images which will be used for defense purposes, but can as well be used in case of humanitarian crisis or for the monitoring of climate change. Secondly, the pooling of sharing of our capabilities is key to enhance the use of our existing resources. In this regard, we are planning to contribute with our resources to the NATO operations and mission. We also intend to provide our product, our LuxEOSys product, in support of security applications like border surveillance, migration control. And the last and not least third priority is the establishment of new partnerships and the strengthening of existing cooperations. In this regard, in the space domain, we already have a couple of existing partnerships, and we look forward to further strengthening the cooperations, especially with the United States, and it's already ongoing. Recently, and I will conclude on that my small introduction, an high-ranking US Space Force representative has characterized Luxembourg's effort in the space field as Luxembourg is punching well above its weight. The analogy with sport, do not Google it, I'm talking about sport here, show that in the field of space, Luxembourg can have an impact and make a fair contribution to the global security and defense effort.
That's fantastic. And I have to acknowledge that getting to know you and having a chance to read about the level of investment that a country like Luxembourg is making into space in general. For me, it really highlights not only the importance of space and the intelligence value that can be derived from space across the world, but it also highlights kind of a key theme that was that Mary ended the last panel with, which is that this is a team sport now, and we, the United States, it's one of our biggest assets is the fact that we bring partners to the table, and being able to add another partner like Luxembourg, who is aligned in a lot of the same ways that, and around a lot of the same problems that we are, it's amazing to see. And being an imagery guy, it's amazing to see you guys putting up your own satellite. But one of the things that I know we've talked about, and we'll talk about a little bit more, is that GEOINT, particularly in the space context, is no longer an imagery game, at least no longer an EO imagery game. EO, SAR, RF, hyperspectral, everything in between, and I think commercial industry is really responding to that broader spectrum need, and I'll use that as a good segue to let Kevin, you introduce yourself, given that you have had the opportunity to cross that full spectrum for many, many years now.
Thanks, Isaac. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Kevin O'Connell. I currently run an advisory firm called Space Economy Rising. You can hear the enthusiasm there, of course. I'm the former director of the Office of Space Commerce, and of course, no stranger to GEOINT, having served as the executive secretary of the NEMA Commission. There might only be 5 people in the room that remember that, actually, and a senior advisor to a variety of the directors of NGA in the past. Mary's waving on that. Thank you, Mary. I'm very excited about the panel today on the business of space. I think it's a topic which needs more attention among the many things that get attention on space and the space economy. I'd want to highlight for you today a couple of points about the space economy as I'm still seeing it. I saw it this way at Commerce, I still see it today. The phrase I like to use is that the space economy is accelerating and diversifying based on the new missions that are coming into the space every single day. So for those of us that have been in this business for a long time, we used to talk about remote sensing, we used to talk about communications, navigation, and those are all changing in and of their own right. But now we're talking about things like food and space medicine, the application of quantum computing, and other technologies as well. It's a very, very exciting time. I'm noticing a new trend here, which is that the early phase of space commerce was really about space people talking either to other space people or people that were familiar with space. But we're really starting to see a new wave of innovation from, I'll say, companies to start that really have no heritage using space, but are taking advantage of the increased availability of space, the lower cost of space. And so we're seeing some folks starting to experiment with space. The early combinations of remote sensing, high-speed communications, and IoT, is one of the first waves of that innovation. But we're going to see a whole lot more, and we can talk about that more. The second is we see so many more people that want to participate in the space economy. And that ranges from the companies that I just talked about all the way to US states. There are a number of states historically. Colorado is one of them, of course. Texas, Florida, California, all very traditional space states. But we're seeing officials, mostly economic development officials in a lot of other states, say, hey, how do we get involved in this? And that's a very good thing. Many times in the past I said every state in this great nation needs to be part of the space economy. And in some ways, if you're not part of the space economy, you're going to be left behind. We're seeing the same thing overseas. We're seeing a number of countries that want to participate in the space economy and recognize the value. So to the point of our panel, I do think we need more focus on the economics of space, the things that underpin it, things like talent. Talent issue is very important. It's been spoken about here. The impact of regulation. How do I keep regulation up in an industry which has blisteringly fast change taking place, and regulatory processes are typically slow? What's the role of private finance? Again, I know we'll talk about that in a moment. And so I think we need a lot more focus on the business of space, the on-ground enablers, and I look forward to us having that conversation.
Absolutely. And you, as usual, have us on the right trajectory down to Lisa at the end of the row here, who I think, to the point here, the business of space is one that involves industry, it involves government, it involves resourcing, it involves technology, it involves a lot of different things. And Lisa, I'm really glad to have you on this panel to help provide the perspective from the commercial, both the investment side of things, but also your expertise throughout your career in actually driving the business and technology side of things as well. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience as well.
Thank you, Isaac, and such a pleasure to be here on this distinguished panel. I'm Lisa Rich, founder of Hemisphere Ventures, a venture firm that has backed 32 commercial space companies and put companies like Axiom Space and Umbra on the map. We're very proud of all of them and their achievements this year. I've also am founder and chief operating officer of Xplore, which is a commercial space company that seeks to be a thought leader in the commercial space industry and shape our understanding of what low-cost solutions are out there with high capability. So we offer data as a service, sensors as a service, and payloads as a service, and most recently operations as a service with a company we acquired that can do mission and flight control software and is operating 15 satellites on orbit currently. Commercial space is near and dear to my heart because I am at the forefront of innovation, both as an investor and as an operator. I get to see all of these early stage companies with technologies that are bubbling up under the surface. And as they grow, we created Xplore as an agile and innovative company to start pulling in new technologies to achieve our goal of low-cost access and seamless access to space where we can bring data back for any customer and go to any destination, as we have a highly capable spacecraft that's destination agnostic and designed to go up to 300 million miles into our solar system, but starting in Earth orbit where the market is today. So Earth orbit is our first domain where we launched this October, and that experience as well is helping us understand the regulatory pathway that we have learned about for our companies previously and now are going through ourselves. So glad that we're going to touch on the regulatory conversation today.
Absolutely, although we're going to hold that one for a little bit because that's always a fun topic. Before I jump in with a question to the panelists, I do want to remind the audience, if you have questions that come up during the panel, please submit them. Come in and I'll see if I can get our esteemed panelists to provide some answers for you. But to kick us off, I think I really want to start off on the investment side of things. So I think probably everybody in this room has over the last decade or so heard the remarks from leadership in the community about the impact that commercial remote sensing has been having on the GEOINT community, the darkening of the skies, the wonderful things that Planet did as they started to change the idea of what it would mean to have a constellation in space. Going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 200 was an interesting challenge, but now we're well past that. So I'm interested, and maybe Lisa, if you want to start, I'm interested in your perspectives on how the investment side of the remote sensing world and in the GEOINT community has changed or is changing now, because I think there's a lot of movement that's going on around where the investments are being made and what the focus from a commercial perspective is today.
Thank you. Well, there are a lot of commercial companies that are kind of engineering first and focusing on specific instruments that they can send to space, so developing out the remote sensing plethora of great insights we can bring back. But there are also companies that are looking at innovations that are farther out, and the investment community isn't necessarily looking to invest in remote sensing per se. They're looking to invest in a company that's going to have the earliest return. And so they don't necessarily have guidance or understanding on where they should put their money. And they also, on the diligence side, may not know where to turn first. What they do know is, and I should say is a little bit of a misunderstanding, they've seen companies that, because of the SPAC environment, have gone public, and they expect now that that kind of trajectory is going to be implicit with maybe any space company, or that's the hope. And it's not true. So they are putting money behind companies that may not have early growth or traction or meet the needs that our government has. But the contracts have to come first in order for a company to have validation in the investor environment. So they're looking at companies and then saying, we know you have contracts, but they also don't necessarily know the meaning of the contracts, asking the question, what is the period of performance? When will the first check be received by the government, for example, for this IDIQ you might have, or an OTA contract, which of course are the vehicles that we would love to see more of.
Without a doubt. Kevin, I want to throw this kind of same question to you, but with a little bit of a different flavor, because I think one of my observations as the commercial space, particularly the commercial remote sensing world, has evolved is that the pure commercial industry and the narrative around the pure commercial use case and the returns that the future returns that are and the potential in that side of the market kind of went off in one direction for a long time, and the government's requirements and the magnitude of the problem sets from a government perspective and the role that they play in the overall market for this type of capability play, I don't think it was necessarily balanced early on. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about how government requirements and the way that the government thinks about investing plays in the business of commercial space today.
Well, so it's a great question, and there are nuances to both aspects of this, and both are needed. And I think one of the fundamental differences we have today, remember the old days when investors would say, well, gee, that's cool, it's space, I don't know much about it, but I'm going to invest a few bucks in it anyway. We've come far away from that because the space investment community today is much more sophisticated. What's really changed here is the ability of someone with a great idea. If you want to use remote sensing, it's a good example because it's come very far in and of itself. It's one of the fastest growing segments in the space economy, for example. But what's really happened is we now have a moment in which the government can validate a requirement, maybe be a first buyer, maybe not even be a large buyer, but essentially give an underwriter's lab approval that says this technical concept actually works, and we're interested enough in it, either speculatively from an innovation perspective or because it's core to our missions, that we're going to put at least a small contract in place to do this. That allows a company to go into the capital markets and then say, okay, the government likes this, and here's the commercial case that I will argue is the case for this company. And the investor can then say, hey, we think you're a government contractor for the next 20 years. That's great. Good luck. All the way up to we think you've got a $100 million business here, and make an appropriate investment accordingly. And so it's changed quite a bit. Both parties are necessary here, and that's very much why we're seeing this growth in the commercial remote sensing market. I can't resist a story that I like to tell. In the early days, I was working for the Director of Central Intelligence, and a fella came in from one of the early companies and said, you know, Kevin, this space-based imagery thing is so exciting that the farmer is going to have to buy it. Now, I'm a kid from Brooklyn, New York, okay? And so my first question was, have you ever met a farmer? Answer, no, okay? And so those people, needless to say, are not in the satellite remote sensing business anymore. What we have seen in this industry segment is a maturation in different market verticals, insurance, agriculture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, specific national security. But we've also seen the application of other advanced technologies, artificial intelligence, data management and storage, other trends that actually have made it one of the most promising aspects within the space economy.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, and it actually, I think, is why I'm really happy to have you here, Geoffroy, because, I mean, Kevin, you and I were talking earlier about the fact that it took us 30 years to get to this point on the commercial imagery side of things. And I mentioned earlier that the reality of where we're at in the picture is it's not just an imagery game anymore. And so I thought it was really fascinating to see the new policy, commercial space, or space policy, space defense policy that you published. Strategy that you published recently, because commercial is a key kind of core component of it from the get-go. So I'm interested maybe if you share your thoughts about how you, in your capacity from a defense intelligence perspective, in today's world, building out a strategy today, look at the commercial market versus the government requirements that you have.
Actually, I think there is a key word here. The key word is resilience. If you want to be resilient, you need to partner not only with allied nations, but also with commercial entity. And that for me, the solution, the only solution to be, to secure the product, the GEOINT product, or it's the same in satellite communication, in space domain awareness, in everywhere. You need to be resilient. And it's also part of our strategy. And by contracting some services to commercial entity, you avoid to be disrupted. You avoid to be blocked, and you are always securing your services and your product for the community. And I think that in defense, it's not an exception at all. We have our governmental system, and we need to keep our governmental system, but we also have to complement that with commercial system and commercial services. That's for me the key.
Yeah, I think that's it's fantastic to see you codifying that together in a strategy from the get-go. which is really powerful, considering that I know on our end we're still trying to unwind a lot of things to get to a point like that. I'm going to shift. Oh.
Yeah, maybe if I may complement to this idea of resilience, there is a new concept in development in NATO, which is called EPSS, Alliance Persistent Surveillance from Space. And it's a key development that Luxembourg is fully supporting. And the idea is to provide to NATO, to the alliance, a tool in order to always be able to receive information and to also to be able to task different assets, commercial assets, allied nations systems or whatever, everything what they call the virtual constellation, and based on the virtual constellation they will be able to task the right asset to deliver the right capability. And also, depending on different sensor, optical sensors, cyber imagery, IS surveillance, RF signal surveillance, anything, they will be able to aggregate all this information in order to provide the right information to the decision maker on the right time, which is essential for me. So this program, APSS, is really for me a key development in order to bring all this commercial technology together with governmental assets and military systems.
Yeah, I think that approach and that program, and particularly in the context of NATO. So we talked about partnerships earlier, and NATO is obviously for us on the US side of things an incredibly important component of our global strategy. And I think it would be remiss for us not to touch on the Ukraine for a moment in this context. I think it's been plain to see the impact that commercial space, commercial GEOINT has had on the global effort for urgent transparency around everything that is happening in that world. And I'd argue that we've seen what kind of we know and love really be embraced broadly as a key, critical, important tool for the global population to be aware and to have an understanding of exactly what's going on in these ways. I'm interested, maybe Kevin, any thoughts that you have on maybe gaps that we have seen or progress that still needs to be made in the way that we can further leverage that commercial capability, what we're seeing in these sorts of large-scale, peer-near-peer sort of strategic environments that we need to be preparing for in the future?
Well, the Ukraine story, of course, is an incredible success story. I mean, Admiral Sharp talked about this yesterday, the ability to undermine Russian disinformation, the ability to bring transparency to this conflict. Remember that we wrote a book in 1999 called Commercial Observation Satellites at the Leading Edge of Global Transparency, and you can probably get a copy for $1. The postage will probably be more, but that's what we were talking about, is that security would be different in a world where there was proliferated sensing from space. There's still more to be done. There are a lot of gaps, there are a lot of places where public diplomacy, and obviously as a broader trend in intelligence, we see the use of more need to share data publicly to convince people about what is happening. There'll be a moment in which you're going to have different competing images of the same thing, and we're going to have to show that we can validate the data that we have as being absolutely with integrity and security. And so those areas are important. There's more transparency to be had in the conflict and in other crisis areas as well. So I think it's a very, very important pivotal moment for us in terms of how we think about warfare and strategy and diplomacy.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think we heard from the last session the transition from need to know to need to share from a government perspective, which I think is really important. And if I extend that concept out into the commercial world, this is a nice transition into the regulatory side of things, which Lisa, I know you wanted to touch on to begin with, but the need to share is really important, the ability to share and the ability to get through the regulatory process on our end in order to be able to even get to the gate to be able to share has always been a challenge. So Lisa, I'm interested in your thoughts on kind of where we are in that picture today.
It's a great question because as we think about the activity internationally, international companies that are have satellite services are at an advantage right now because US companies have more of a labyrinth to achieve fulfill regulatory requirements. So it should be easy for us to be flying. It should be easy for us to go through that process. And what we're finding is it's time consuming. It is better than it used to be, but it's onerous. And there's a question mark in terms of timing, where a company can be fully prepared with all of the engineering and the components, the supply chain, and solve that problem. But then you're now at the point of getting ready to launch and having a question mark of, will you launch on time because you're waiting for approvals. So that's something I think we really want to take a look at. How can we make that process more efficient and benefit our commercial space companies? And I mentioned internationally, they have an advantage because right now you could be flying with a company that has international, a non-US company that can solve that regulatory for you and get to flight faster. You know, they've got that nut cracked. So how do we replicate that for our companies, allowing that part of the process to not be a bottleneck?
Yeah, speed. Speed is critical.
Speed. And this benefits it benefits us as we look at space traffic management. Having a better regulatory allows us to have a better space traffic management strategy.
I think it's funny because the importance of, I mean, you hear it in the news every day from all different corners of the industry, but the importance of that space situational awareness and on our end, space domain awareness as well is unbelievable. And this is one of those places where I know Kevin, from putting your old hat on, looking at the priorities and the budget. So I mean, looking forward into the FY23 side of things, an 800% increase in NOAA's budget related to space commerce, right? And a lot of talk around real-time tracking and the importance of that as a key component of that. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you think that that funding can be utilized and the role that commercial can play in it, and the hurdles that still exist in order to be able to realize that.
So I started with a very optimistic discussion about the space economy. The nearest term thing that can ruin all of that is the space debris problem. And so you can see congressional testimony that I've given in the past. There are a number of tools that we have in the toolkit to deal with it. The first is not creating new debris as you go to space. The second is really deeply improving our understanding of how things move in the space environment, moving that to the civil side. I'll give congressional testimony on Friday on this again. How do we get this to a civil SSA system so we can more openly share data with space operators and others and allow the Space Force to do what it needs to do in space? Developing a space traffic management system quickly. And to revert just to a point that Lisa was making, in terms of regulation is a competitive business these days. Business seeks in this area, as it does in every other business, it seeks the most permissive environment. Okay, and we have to keep that in mind. And there are areas where we still do need controls, but we need to work them and harmonize them with our allies. But we have to realize that there are other places on Earth that will quickly take on new exciting businesses without the kind of regulatory controls that we would like to keep behind. Back to the space traffic management issue. I was delighted to see a substantial increase in the budget proposed by NOAA for FY23. It's a very important problem. It does need substantial investment on the civil side. It is still a whole of government effort, by the way. People tend to forget that. In terms of commercial entities, if I were to do a comparison between the commercial remote sensing industry in 1998 and where we are on SSA today, the ecosystem of companies in 1998 was relatively small and immature. We have a much richer ecosystem of commercial companies, both here in the United States, but also with our allies overseas, that can actually work in this mission immediately. They have capabilities that can be brought to bear immediately on this problem. And we're hoping that some of that money is spent directly on the private sector to quickly mitigate the space debris problem.
Can I
Absolutely, Lisa.
just wanted to add to Kevin's point. We need to be more innovative on regulatory because this allows us to compete.
Exactly.
Without a doubt. All right, we have just a couple minutes left. Time flies when you're having fun. But I would be remiss, given the timely nature of the announcement this morning. We got a question from the audience for you, Kevin. Rich Dalbella was just named into your previous position in the Office of Space Commerce this morning. So the question from the audience is, what advice would you give to Rich on steps needed within that role to keep U.S. leadership in commercial remote sensing moving forward?
So first of all, my warmest congratulations to Rich. Obviously, I think it's the best job in the federal government. I'm biased, so we'll congratulate him first. As I started out earlier today, there's a large portion of what we're talking about that really is about economics and finance. And this is why the Commerce Department needs to have a very strong role in this area. What I hope Rich has access to, as I did, was the direct interest of the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary, as well as access to the men and women of the Commerce Department, where there are so many different tools, ranging from trade advocacy and export controls and the technical agencies, NOAA and NIST and NTIA. Rich will need to have access to all of those organizations seamlessly to bring the business of space to bear on what we're all trying to do in the space economy and keep America competitive.
It's a team sport for sure.
Team sport.
And I think it's a team sport that is, I think, well represented by all of you on this stage, and I think this community. And it's really exciting to see where we've gotten to and the opportunity that's in front of us. So with that, I think I will take the opportunity to hand the stage back to our esteemed host for this morning, Mary. But thank you very much. And thanks to the panel. If we can get a round of applause for them.
Absolutely.